Long ago, not too far from the third mainland bridge, in the bustling heart of Lagos, there lived a young man named Francis. He was born in the dusty back streets of Ikorodu, where the days were hard and the nights even harder. He grew up watching men sweat for pennies and women cry in silence, their stomachs growling louder than the downfall horns at dawn. But Francis, he wanted more. Not just food on the table, but power. Not just survival, but status. He wanted to wear gold that blinded, drive cars that roared like thunder, and have people call him boss with trembling lips. And so, like many who hunger too much too fast, he found his way into the dark corners of Lagos, the kind of corners that do not appear on maps. They called it the wire game. It was a world where digits and deception brought dollars and danger. The players were smart, greedy, and without mercy. And at the center of it were the court fathers, men cloaked in silk but soaked in blood. They didn't speak often, but when they did, their words came with consequences. Francis rose quickly. He had the charm of a pastor and the cunning of a hyena. Within months, his bank alert screamed louder than thunderclaps in rainy season. His friends started calling him the Wire Lord of Ikorodu. People bowed when he walked past, not out of respect, but out of fear. But the court fathers were watching. One rainy night, under the shadow of the third mainland, he was summoned. He arrived at a hidden shrine by the lagoon, where the air was thick with incense and secrets. They sat around a fire that didn't burn wood, but something far worse. They looked at Francis with eyes that saw his soul. "You want to go higher," one of them said, voice like gravel and smoke. "You want wealth that never ends. You want to walk in America without visa. You want to own houses in Banana Island." Francis nodded. His mouth was dry, but his eyes glowed with ambition. "Then you must give us something," said the tallest one, dressed in crimson wrapper soaked with something dark. "Your girlfriend." Francis's heart froze like water in the harmattan. He had given the court fathers cows, goats, black soap made in the belly of the earth, and even whispered his own mother's name in rituals, but this. His girlfriend. Her name was Amoka. She wasn't just a woman to him, she was the only softness he had left in a world made of sharp edges. She had stood by him back when he was still selling phone accessories on Ikorodu Road, back when he wore one shirt for 3 days and used sachet water to bathe. Amoka had dreams too. She wanted to be a nurse. She spoke Yoruba with a sweet village melody, and when she laughed, even Francis's demons seemed to pause. Every man in the game had something he refused to lose. Amoka was that thing for him. "I can't," Francis muttered, his voice trembling like dry leaves in wind. "You must," the court father said, eyes glowing like coals. "The spirits are hungry. And only the blood of what you love most will make your money eternal." Francis knelt in the sand, shaking. Sweat poured from his body like rain off a zinc roof. "What if I give you someone else?" he begged. "A stranger, a friend, even an enemy." The court fathers laughed. A slow, ancient laugh that made the night colder. "Then your money shall be borrowed, not earned." With a thunderclap that shook the shrine, they disappeared into darkness, leaving Francis alone, his choice echoing in his ears. That night, he didn't sleep. He returned home and looked at Amoka differently. Not with love, but with fear. She didn't know her name had been spoken in a shrine, that her breath had almost been exchanged for Ben's keys and Bitcoin. Amoka, gentle Amoka, held him close that night. She thought he was stressed. She had no idea what kind of devils were now walking behind him. But Francis had made his choice. He would not give her. Not even for all the dollars in the central bank. The court fathers did not return immediately. They waited. They watched. And then, they struck. At first, everything seemed normal. Francis still logged into his laptop, still wore his designer drip, and still got calls from boys asking for connect. His crypto wallets remained fat, and his name still rang like a church bell from Ikorodu to Lekki. But something had shifted. It started small. One morning, Francis was brushing his teeth when he heard someone whisper, "She must go." He turned sharply. No one was there. Amoka was still sleeping, curled like a baby under their Ankara bedsheet. He shook it off. "Stress," he said to himself. "Just stress." But the whispers grew louder. Every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., he heard footsteps circling his house. He would look out the window, no one. But the next morning, he'd find footprints in ash on his tile floor. Ash. Indoors. He called a pastor once. The pastor took one look at Francis's aura and said, "My son, some spirits were out border. I cannot fight this one." Then came the mirrors. Whenever Francis looked in one, he didn't see himself. He saw a version of himself, but naked, weeping, and covered in deep scars that bled into the glass. Still, Francis refused to give Amoka. One day, while walking through Computer Village in Ikeja, he saw a child. The boy looked up at him and smiled. But when Francis blinked, the boy's face twisted into something monstrous, a face made of shadows and teeth. It hissed, "You are breaking the oath?" Francis screamed and ran through the crowd like a madman. People laughed, some filmed him. One clip ended up on TikTok with the caption, "Yohu boy dey craze." But it wasn't funny. Francis began to deteriorate. He spoke in tongues that didn't belong to any tribe. He would go missing for hours, only to be found sitting in muddy gutters, whispering names of ancient spirits. He started to dig holes in the floor of his house, saying, "The money is running, it's running under the earth." Amoka tried to stay. She prayed, she fasted, she cried. But one night, she awoke to find Francis standing over her with a broken bottle in one hand and his own blood dripping from the other. He whispered, "They said I must finish it. If I don't, I'll never be free." She ran. Barefoot. Into the night. Into the rain. She didn't even take her phone. By morning, she was gone. Francis never saw her again. And that's when the cult fathers returned. This time, they didn't speak. They just laughed. And touched his forehead. The night they touched Francis's forehead, everything inside him shattered. He screamed, not with his voice, but with his soul. A scream so deep it seemed to come from the belly of the earth itself. Neighbors heard it and locked their doors. Dogs howled. The moon hid behind clouds. And then, silence. When the sun rose the next morning, Francis was sitting in the middle of Ikorodu roundabout. Naked. Covered in red sand. Laughing. People gathered. "Now why our Lord be this? See as him fine face don't turn like person we drink cement. God punish ritual money oh." He laughed and danced. He sang songs that made no sense. He told children he was the president of the underworld. He tried to baptize a goat. Nobody could help him. The cult fathers had taken the last piece of him, his mind. That was the punishment. Not death. Not poverty. But madness that money could not cure. Because they had given him a seat at the table of devils, and he had tried to eat without paying fully. His Benz gathered dust. His crypto wallets froze. His boys deserted him. Even the small boys who once begged him for a blessing now crossed the street when they saw him. He became a ghost of glory, a legend of warning. People started telling his story to others as a lesson. Don't envy that flashy life unless you know what funded it. Remember Francis, the one who refused to finish the ritual. Amoka was never seen again. Some say she fled to Benin. Others say she became a nurse in Canada. But a few whisper that she still lights candles for him every year, in secret, praying that the man she once loved might one day be free. But freedom is expensive. And in the world Francis entered, the only accepted currency is blood. Years passed. The world moved on, but Francis remained frozen, trapped in a world between memory and madness. Some say he wandered barefoot from Ikorodu to Oshodi, others swear they saw him motoring to the waves at Elegushi Beach. His once polished skin now bore scars, ritual marks that had deepened over time, crawling like roots across his body. They called him Omo Eru, child of fear. Even the Adboros gave him space. He wore tattered designer shirts, remnants of the glory he once flaunted. His favorite was a dusty Fendi top with a hole in the chest, which he wore like a badge of shame. He carried an old laptop bag, filled not with tech, but with stones, feathers, dead cockroaches, and scraps of newspaper he believed were sacred texts. He no longer spoke in complete sentences. Instead, he whispered quotes. 0-1-1-0, fire in the blockchain, banana islands melting, sacrifice pending. Children used to laugh and throw sachet water at him. But one day, a boy tried to slap him, and the boy froze midair, body stiff like a wooden statue. He stayed that way for 3 hours until an old herbalist came and whispered a chant into his ear. After that, nobody dared touch Francis again. People began to fear him, not just as a madman, but as something else. Something not quite human. They said he walked through markets without making a sound. That he could appear in 2 places at once. That he sometimes sat in the cemetery and had conversations with nothing. But underneath all the madness, a part of Francis remained trapped. Deep, deep inside. That part still cried for Amoka. That part still remembered her soft voice, the way she used to call him Choku M, her gentle way of saying my God whenever he came home late. And so, one rainy night, after years of wandering, Francis returned to the old house in Ikorodu, the place they once shared. The landlord had long boarded it up. Weeds grew from the windows. Rats ruled the kitchen. But Francis walked through the rusted gate as if it were yesterday. He stood in their old bedroom, staring at the faded wall where Amoka had once written in lipstick. Me plus you equals forever. Francis dropped to his knees. He began to weep, not with madness, but with memory. For the first time in years, he said a name with clarity. Amoka. And something shifted. Far away, in Benin City, a candle flickered on its own. A woman sitting in a small one-room apartment felt a sudden chill. She turned to her altar, where a photo of Francis sat behind a candle, and whispered, "He's close." But that moment didn't last. The very next second, the court fathers appeared in the shadows of the room. No longer in flesh, no longer cloaked in cloth, but pure spirit. Darker than night. Colder than death. They circled Francis slowly. "You disobeyed," one hissed. "You resisted the path," another growled. "And yet you return, hoping for peace," the third laughed. Francis shook. His lips trembled. "I want to go back," he whispered. "I want to be free." The tallest of them leaned forward. His voice was not a sound, it was a feeling, like oil sliding down a spine. "Then pay the final price." Meanwhile, Amoka, in her tiny room, prepared for a journey. She packed a small bag, holding her last savings, Nigerian Naira 7,800, and her passport. But something told her to go back. She didn't understand why. She had built a new life. She was safe now. But the dream kept coming. In it, Francis stood in fire. He was reaching out to her, not for help, but for forgiveness. Back in Ikorodu, thunder cracked. Francis rose, now half-possessed. The court fathers began a final ritual. In the corner of the room, a portal opened, a mirror of fire, showing 2 paths. One led to total darkness, where his soul would vanish forever. The other led to redemption, but it required a sacrifice greater than blood. Francis had one choice to make. And time was running out. The mirror of fire cracked and hissed like a living beast. Francis stood before the portal in his old, decayed house in Ikoredu, face sunken, eyes hollow, lips dry from years of madness. Behind him, the court fathers towered like shadows cast by a sun that no longer existed. They waited. Silent. Smiling. Certain of his doom. He was the boy who defied them, and now, they would collect. But the mirror, it offered two futures. One was darkness. Eternal wandering. A soul drowned in sorrow. The other was light, distant, flickering, and painful to reach, but possible. And then, something happened that even the court fathers did not expect. A knock at the broken door. Knock knock. Soft. Yet sharp. Like the past knocking on the present. Francis turned slowly. His mind, frayed and torn, struggled to make sense. The door creaked open. And there she was. Amoka. She looked older, thinner, but her eyes had not changed. They still carried that same calm storm, the eyes that had once loved him when he had nothing. She stepped in slowly. Her wrapper soaked from the rain. Her voice, barely a whisper. Francis. The court fathers hissed. One raised a hand to strike, but the portal flared, blocking them with a scream of flame. Something was shifting, an ancient law being rewritten by presence alone. Francis blinked. Something in his eyes softened. The madness began to loosen, as though Amoka's voice was a knife cutting the ropes around his soul. He fell to his knees. Why did you come back? Amoka held back tears. Because I never stopped praying. Even when you turned into something else. Even when I ran. I always lit one candle, just one. For you. The court fathers growled louder. They began to chant, ancient words not meant for human ears. But the mirror responded again. This time, it spoke. Yes. Spoke. In a deep, female voice that echoed through the house. The price has been paid. Not in blood, but in love. The court fathers shrieked. They howled in pain, for love was a weapon they could never hold, never understand. Their power twisted, cracking like dry wood under fire. Suddenly, a wind blew through the house, hot and wild. The mirror shattered into dust, and the court fathers evaporated into smoke, screaming as they were dragged back into the realm they came from. And Francis. He collapsed. Amoka rushed to him, held him, sobbed over him as he trembled in her arms. His lips whispered something. Thank you. For the first time in years, he slept. Peacefully. Epilogue, the man who lived twice. Francis never returned to the wire game. He spent the next 3 years in silence, rebuilding what was left of his life. He became a gardener in Benin City, quiet, humble, never once speaking of his past unless he was alone at night, staring into the stars. Amoka became a nurse, just like she had always wanted. She never married anyone else. She stood by Francis, not because he had once been rich, but because she had loved the boy, not the Lord. Together, they opened a small youth foundation, teaching young boys in the streets of Lagos how to make money through honest work, graphics design, coding, digital marketing. Every time a boy tried to ask about shortcuts, Francis would only say, I have walked the road. There is nothing at the end but ash. And then he would look away, quietly. Moral of the story. There is no shortcut to destiny. What you gain without sacrifice, you will lose without warning. When wealth comes too quickly, it often comes with a shadow following behind. But the love of one good woman, or the truth of one good friend, can bring back even the man lost to demons. Be careful who you envy. And more importantly, be careful what you offer, just to be seen.